Welcome to First Dates and Soulmates, the podcast that is here to remind you that the A in the rainbow alphabet does not stand for ally, y'all. I am Nikki McKnight.
And I'm Meg Casebolt.
And on today's episode, we are continuing our theme of Pride Month, although, we're gay and queer all the time, but, real focus here in June. And today we are going to talk about something I haven't seen talked about in a lot of places, and that is asexual romance.
I feel like it's very underrepresented. Like, as the umbrella goes, we see so much we see some MF, we see some trans, but like ace is just very low touch in the romance space.
Haha. Low sexy touch.
Low touch.
Perhaps.
Low touch.
Yeah. So, Meg, what is your experience with romance stories that have ace characters or those who would kind of identify on the ace spectrum?
I've stumbled into them, but this was the first time preparing for this episode that I actively sought them out. So there have been times where I'm reading a book and I see sort of the signs of a demisexual character, and sometimes it's explicit and they have a conversation about it, and sometimes it's just sort of implied, or it's there, or it's under the surface, and that's okay. And I think I read one ace book that I wasn't expecting the character to be ace and sex averse ace, but it was in a throuple situation.
Interesting.
Which was a way to get around it, But for
was it Emmy Sanders?
It was Emmy Sanders. I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Which book it was.
But that was the only time where I really saw it just sort of like in my day-to-day reading. But then as I was going through to prep for this episode, I was like, oh, there's actually some really interesting stories being told this way too. So I was thrilled that you sort of put it on the calendar and went, hey, this is a different piece of Pride than just, just the MMs, because that is such a huge part of the queer genre.
Exactly. Yeah. I love that you mentioned a couple terms as you were talking. You mentioned demi, you mentioned ace, and all of this to say, folks, is identify how you wish to be identified. It is fluid. You can change it. But under this umbrella of discussion today, I think we are going to hit on, people who identify as ace, who identify as sex averse, who maybe identify as demi or gray. It's all under this beautiful umbrella, and we are here for that discussion today. And I also just want to point out, as the definitions corner, context corner here, that I don't want to conflate or confuse sexual attraction and romantic attraction, because those are different things. And it's certainly something we see a lot of in this genre, that folks who might be asexual, but that does not mean they are aromantic. It doesn't mean they don't want relationships. It doesn't mean, I hate that I have to say this, but it is a storyline in a lot of these books. It doesn't mean they're othered or they're broken or anything like that. It's just a different way that sexual attraction can manifest. And I think that is so fascinating to look at through the lens of romance, because when we think romance, we think sex.
Right.
Closed door, open door, it doesn't really matter, but we kind of expect there to be a physical relationship, and that physical relationship, that physical intimacy of going all the way is, it's just such a common part of things. And it typically becomes a plot point in that something happens after they have sex, or the sex is the meaningful connection, or it's the thing that seals the deal. That to not have that be as present, because it still might be present, but as present, I find really interesting.
Yeah. And I think we also should be clear that, like, asexuality doesn't mean that you can't be sexually attracted to somebody. Being aromantic, which we are not going to do an episode about, in part because we could not find a ton of aro books, which is
that were
disappointing.
Good. I found some bad ones.
Yeah. But it's all of this is a spectrum, and just because you're aro doesn't mean that you don't want any sort of relationship. It means maybe you want more of a friendship relationship, but not necessarily the romantic relationship. And so I haven't really seen, especially that side of the aspec, or a spectrum, aspec, really discuss that much in the romance space. And I was looking at that even before we talked about this, because I have a character coming out who is like on the aro spectrum, but he doesn't necessarily fit all the criteria too. So I get to play with that in my own writing and say, okay, which of these fits Darius and which doesn't? Which of these is how he self-identifies, but not using the language? And I think that that's something that romance has a really beautiful way of being able to explore and say, here's the definition. here's some of the variants, but just the same way that we would discuss, like, I don't know, this isn't a medical condition, but like a medical condition where it's like there are symptoms, but you don't have to have all the symptoms to diagnose, and you don't have to diagnose to get treatment, and you don't have to get treatment in order to be a fully functioning human being. It just is who you are. It is something that you're implicitly in. You know, if you have a chronic condition, that doesn't mean you have to behave a certain way. It just is a part of you. And so not to make it negative in any way, but just to say this is part of who you are. I don't know if it's genetics or if it's in you in some way or just the way you were raised or who knows where this comes from, but it's just as valid as the more kind of allosexual approaches that we usually see in the romance space.
And you know, we talk in romance about tropes and about conventions, but at the end of the day, every single person wants to read a well-structured story that is specific to humans. And oftentimes you'll see
humanoids.
Or humanoids. There you go. Maybe not even humanoids. Maybe just pure up alien, and it's a minotaur. I don't know. Is that considered
I read a very good siren, and I also read a very good shadow monster. Okay.
Oh, okay. You know what? Let's identify we are monster inclusive here. But it's
humanoids.
There you go. Well, others, everybody, all creatures that are living and consenting, have fun.
Yes.
But we get to layer in. You know, a lot of times you'll see author notes that are like, "Hey, this character is an FBI agent, and I did some research, but at the end of the day, just accept what I am telling you."
Yes.
Or there'll be person, like, I can't remember what author it was, but they sent out an email today talking about their next release, and it was like, hey, I was brought up with scoliosis, and I had spinal fusion and all these things, and my upcoming release is set, I believe, in the Old West, where one of the characters has scoliosis, and she's known as, like, crooked back, and it was just like, hey, I'm kind of sharing my own individual experience through this character. Obviously, it's different because it's in the old times where spinal fusion wasn't an option. But what would it be like for a person like that? And much like our episode that just came out 2 weeks ago with Joanna Lowell, talking about like that historical extraordinary, just being like open to the possibilities that we get to play with in the genre and realize that there are so many different ways to represent things.
Right.
And in many ways, like, these types of books help me figure out that I was asexual.
Exactly.
Which just, like, blew my fucking mind. Like, I'm sure we'll get into the cultural implications of people who are on the ace spectrum in romance and how it's, you know, allosexual people are represented in all things. But, like, yeah, this was an education piece for me.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Before we get into the sort of like the self-awareness component of it, I want to say, like, as an author, I think it's really important to say this is one person's experience that I'm trying to represent here. And often this will show up in those content warnings or in some of these disclaimers to say, like, I tried to be as faithful as I could to the experience as I know them. You know, maybe authors are hiring sensitivity readers or talking to some people in their readership. I think we talked to DJ Jameson about some of the people who are in her membership who had this specific condition, and she just asked them about their experience in order to integrate that. But she had like 3 different members of her community who had this one, I can't remember which one, but like some sort of chronic condition. And then she made sort of an amalgam for her character that worked for the character. And so even when we're having these conversations about specific sexualities, asexualities, the author gets to choose what it looks like for that specific character, and that should not be universal because there is no universal to any of it. And that's sort of what makes it interesting and valuable, is that the specific is what makes it resonate with people, so that can be applied universally, and you can think more about yourself in that self-awareness way.
I love that you brought up like kind of the emotional aspect of it, because obviously we all read romance for that emotional connection, the storytelling, the payoff. And when we start talking about kind of ace characters or aspec characters, you get to play a little bit with what is going to fill the space of the story.
Yes.
Where I'll say sexual anticipation typically lives in what I would call like a quote unquote straight by the rote romance, just as a framework for comparison.
Hetero-allo romance.
Yeah, you know, and again, there's so much nuance within that. But like if we look at that as kind of an archetypal structure of what do we expect in those stories, there's that sexual tension, there's that emotional aspect around being intimate, and how do we get to play with those same emotions but with a different vehicle in an aspec story? How do you negotiate what works for both characters? I was rereading Upside Down by N.R. Walker the other day, And one thing I really loved and appreciated about how it navigated this is both of these characters are pretty sex averse. They're not interested at all. But one of the characters, headphones guy on the bus, runs like an ace support group. And the other main character has been struggling with their own identity. He's like, I'm nerdy, I'm talk a lot, probably neurodivergent. I always struggle in relationships. And then a friend of his says, have you looked into asexual? And he starts doing this research and it sends him down this rabbit hole that he's not really happy with. Because he goes, I don't want another label. Another label just makes me feel like more broken, more I have to be treated differently. And then he ends up at this ace support group where his crush headphones guy from the bus is leading the meeting, and they end up together, but they definitely have to negotiate what is and is not included because it's so personal. And again, this happens everywhere. This type of negotiation should be present everywhere. What are you okay with? What are you consenting to? What are you into? And am I into that? And as long as there's that explicit negotiation, then go forth and have fun, folks. Go forth and bang or not bang to your heart's content. But I love that negotiation
and whatever banging
aspect.
looks like for you.
There you go. But I love the negotiation aspect of relationships in aspec because it's coming out in a different way.
Yeah. It is. It's not just being queer generally or gay generally, because I don't think those are terms that are more universally acceptable or accepted or familiar with. But being able to say I'm asexual, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm sex averse. I just have different boundaries or things that I need before I can feel comfortable with somebody, can certainly add a different level of communication that needs to happen. And I think for me, one of the things that I loved reading all these ace books in the past week or two has been the boundaries that are so explicitly clarified. So I read this great book, actually, Nikki, I think you'd like it. It's called Cupid Calling by Viano Onimo.
Oh, that was on my list. I just didn't get around to it.
Very cute. And the reason I said I think you'd like it is because it is based on a reality TV show. So the two...
Give me the drama.
Exactly. You love a good reality TV show. So the two characters are both contestants on a Bachelorette-style show. And so they're both going on dates with the Bachelorette, Sophia. And then Sophia kisses Ejiro without his consent. And he feels a little bit uncomfortable with it, but he kisses her back because there are cameras and what are you supposed to do? And I'm supposed to be wooing this person and I'm supposed to be into her and I don't know why I'm not. And this is very strange to me because I was really getting along with her and feeling like I was getting to know her, and then she kissed me and I wasn't ready for it and I didn't like it and I don't know how to say that and it's going to get me eliminated. And there's this other contestant who's becoming my friend, Obiora, who I would like to spend more time with, and I don't want to get kicked off the show because I have boundaries. And so he's talking to Obiora about it, and Obiora's like, maybe you're demisexual and you just need more time to get to know her. And she, pushed through your boundaries and wasn't aware that you had those boundaries. She didn't ask for explicit consent and you need to talk to her about it. And so they did that on air. They recorded the conversations that way it could be broadcast out to all of the UK about this conversation about you need to, even if you're into somebody, that doesn't give you consent to kiss them without some sort of permission. And then, as Ejiro is sort of exploring and understanding what he's comfortable with and thinking back on past relationships and saying, oh, my previous girlfriends have all just sort of done that. They've all just assumed consent and said, oh, you're so shy. You would never initiate without me taking care of it, so I'll just do it for you. And then he's with Obiora, who's like, no, babe, I need enthusiastic verbal consent to move forward. And if that means we do absolutely nothing, that means we do absolutely nothing. And he really waits until Ejiro is completely ready and able to express that verbal consent. And that was so sexy. There was no pressure, and there were times where Ejiro was even thinking, I wish he would just take control and do it so I didn't have to speak it out loud. But, that decision, those boundaries, that communication was so integral to the plot.
Ooh, I do like that. Is that, are those Nigerian characters? Or is it Nigerian author? Okay, I see.
Nigerian author, two Nigerian characters, one of whom was born in Nigeria, one of whom was second generation in the UK, and it takes place entirely in the UK and a little bit in Venice because they have the big reality show trip to Venice, the big romantic trip.
I think the reason I looked at it was for our reality TV episode that was on my list, and I never got around to it that time either. Okay, this is just coming back around. Clearly, it needs to be on my
It is
TDR.
so, and oh my gosh, it's gonna hit so many of your like longing, but like forbidden love, because like, oh, but we're on a TV show. We're supposed to, like, we're all dating this bachelor. We shouldn't be hooking up with each other, and so there's like a lot of pining and yearning, and oh, you're gonna love it.
I tell you, aspec romance books are definitely where I get to do a lot of the yearning, and get to experience a lot of the yearning, which is my favorite thing. And it's like,
And meanwhile, I'm like, I'm at 70%. Can we get this party going, guys?
but here's the thing. I just wondered this. How would an aspec romance bring in slow burn? Like, how does slow burn show up differently in aspec? Like, because typically when I say slow burn, the slow burn is typically associated with a sexual relationship or declaring the relationship status.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we're banging, but we haven't said we're boyfriends, or we haven't said we're going to get married. Or the slow burn could be leading up to that moment of sexual and physical intimacy. So I just had this thought. I don't know. I'm workshopping this out loud.
Yeah.
Does slow burn look different in an aspec romance?
I think it does. I think slow burn might, especially if we're in a non-sex relationship, because sometimes in ace we still do have that eventual demisexual attraction. We need to trust somebody, and then it does turn into a sexual relationship. But I did read a couple that didn't have even a kiss, Nikki. Even a kiss. And I thought that I'd be like, really? But no, it was lovely. Two of them that I'm thinking of specifically are Our Bloody Pearl by D.N. Bryn. It is a pirate and a siren.
Ooh.
And so there is a little bit of like sexual mismatch where it's like, you have a fin, you don't have legs. How could we even do anything sexual?
Oh,
like
there's no pocket.
she has a slit. I'm sorry, not she. They have a slit because they shift between genders based on what the pod needs. So if the pod needs, they were born with a uterus. If the pod doesn't need more babies, they don't use the uterus. If they do, then it activates the uterus and it sort of like comes back. So
go uterus, activate! Power Rangers?
Like, Avengers assemble! Activate uterus! I think it is more Power Rangers was activate instead of assemble.
Tyrannosaurus!
Yeah, you have the younger nephew. You know more like the little kid stuff.
Oh, no, I was into Power Rangers. I used to play Power Rangers on the playground, and I saw all the movies in theaters when they came out. But I digress.
So in that case, the decision for romance was, we're going to stay together, in this particular world. Sirens are like on the black market. And so they Pearl is their name, Our Bloody Pearl. They were kidnapped and put into the pirate ship of a different pirate and basically put in a bathtub with minimal amount of water and a weight on their tail, and very like unable to move, like shackled to a tub so that way they could be transported and sold eventually. And then that pirate ship is taken over by the good guy pirate ship, and they're disabled. They can't swim the same way that they could before the situation. And their pirate is like trying to help them and guide them back to safety. And there's a caregiver aspect to it, and there's trust building. And like when the pirate took over the ship, he like killed a bunch of the bad pirates and like gave her slices of liver to bring her back to life. Like, it's a really bloody but like heartfelt romantic situation. And then his sister ends up building her like these mechanics around like a tail that moves for her. And then, it's like the ways that they're caring for each other. And even though she doesn't have legs, when he gets bit by another siren, she has to like tear off the other siren and carry him back to land and climb through and like put herself in danger. And I think there's a little bit of romantic suspense. You can get away with this. Yeah. Like, not even closed door, but just like they don't need to have the physical intimacy in order to be bonded. And so by the end of that book, the choice that they're making is, okay, we're in a pod together.
Oh,
we don't need to
pod squad.
And they're even saying like, I love you. I think your toes are gross. I'm never going to want you to touch me that way.
They make me angry.
Right. Like, because they're used to having a fin. Yeah. And so it's like a very sweet, like, they don't need to have the sexual intimacy to have the sensual touch and the love between them and the caring and the choice to have a future together. So I think that that's a way that you can do it. And it doesn't, and the other version that I saw, it's called the Cyberkinetic Tea Shop by Meredith Kate.
That's a great name.
Right? It is a great name. It is 300 years into the future. And so there are now, like, 200 years ago, there were robots that were like humanoid robots. And there were a bunch of, this is such a great sci-fi moment. There were a bunch of laws that were passed that were like, okay, that was too weird. We're not going to, like, make any more robots, but we're not going to kill the robots either because they're sentient, and so it would be murder.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It was a lot of really questionable ethics in this book, and so
that's
there's
always true though in robots, like the laws of robotics. If you've ever read the short stories in like around iRobot, that stuff's fucked up, dude.
That's really weird. Yeah. So anyway, Sal has been running this tea shop for 278 years. She really wants to make it to 300 years. Her original owner from 200 years ago has passed away. All that she knows how to do is have this tea shop, but then there are, this new girl moves into town and they become friends. And when the tea shop gets attacked by basically like anti-robot terrorists.
Oh my God.
Because, the girl that she meets is like, okay, come live with me. Like, I'll take care of you. I love you. This woman is a tech who works with robots. So she's able to like redo and update all of Sal's internal hardware because that's her job, but also because Sal has been like out of date and so her memory's failing. And it's like almost like an elder care piece going on there. But neither of them needs to have sex in order to feel like they are bonded and they're going to continue their life together and they're going to go live near her family and all these different, so I think sometimes the connection point doesn't necessarily have to be sex. It has to be intimacy and it has to be, although I guess to an extent, if you're going to pull off someone's like shell and look inside them, there is a certain amount of like penetration happening. But like the intimacy is required, but it doesn't have to be physical or sexual or sensual intimacy in order for it to be, we're going to live our lives together. We're going to have an optimistic, what was the phrase? Optimistic, the happy ever after.
Emotionally
satisfying optimistic ending.
Yeah. So
right? You don't need sex to have an emotionally satisfying, optimistic ending.
Yeah, for sure. I was looking back through a lot of the kind of like aspec romance content that I've typically read, and I was trying to figure out like what are some of the structures we typically see as it pertains to sexual intimacy in the books, just to try to see like what are some patterns, what are some common, I'll call them setups, right? So you have a scenario where both characters are sex averse, or just like not interested. It might not be like a, but it just might be a, nah. So they're fully sex-free, which is what Upside Down by N.R. Walker is. You have some stories where they sometimes have sex and they're both okay with it. Maybe they're both on the aspec and it's just not something they're into all the time. Or maybe one of them leans more allo, but is totally cool with not doing it as much. And the person who identifies more as aspec is like, yeah, sometimes I feel like it. And when I feel like it, I'm all in. But when I don't feel like it, I'm not in. And then there's a third type I saw that was maybe someone had been identifying as somewhere on the gray ace spectrum, and then they meet a specific person, and then they're like, "No, I'm all in. Like right. I am
for
changed,
this person,
for this person." Or there's another scenario, because we mentioned the Emmy Sanders book real quick at the top of the show, which is where they bring in a third, or they have an open relationship where the aspec character is like, "Yeah, cool. I know this is something you need. I love you. I trust you. We are in a relationship. I know you have needs that I can't fulfill, and I'm totally cool with you doing that." And in the case of the Emmy Sanders book, which is Unconventional Hearts, the other person does become just like a permanent part of the relationship. They are a permanent third. It's not necessarily like an open, but that third person involved in the relationship is able to fulfill the sexual need in one of the characters and the romantic need in everyone present. And I just liked all of those structures generally, because I thought they were interesting in terms of how they approach characters, and they don't tend to be especially dogmatic, because again, like it all comes down to, can the author prove it? Can the author make me believe that this makes sense? Like obviously I've read some shit books that were like, oh my God, I'm changed by your magical penis. I'm going to forget everything. And I'm like, maybe that's true and it's totally cool, but like, I just don't believe that this character would, with what you have shown me, make these choices. So I'm like, the payoff isn't really there. Like the you know, having sex doesn't have to be the payoff, but like we want the intimacy, we want the romance to be involved somehow. But it's like, yeah, I've read some shit once. It was like, oh my God, I'm cured by the magical penis.
And I think that's just like, it's bad writing because the whole point, I would say, like, as a romance writer, the point of a sex scene is to advance the characters and advance the plot. Mm-hmm. It's not just like, what's the spiciest shit we can put in here? Although, like, if that's how you want to write it, great. If that's what you want to read, great. Mm-hmm. But the sex scene, otherwise it's just like erotica. It's like PWP erotica. And there's nothing wrong with that either.
Have fun. I read that too. There's
As we talked
for everyone.
Exactly. When we talked to Allison about bothered stories, and it's like, even with short stories and erotica, it still has to have something change. It still has to have some sort of transformation happen, even if it's small, even if it's short. Like, it doesn't have to be life-changing, but there should be some sort of transformation happening. And if the transformation isn't in line with the scale of what's happening in the book, and it's like the transformation is too big or it changes too much, then that makes it unbelievable.
Yeah, I was trying to remember as you were talking originally, like, what was the episode where I talked about action scenes being like Liam Neeson? And it was the episode with bothered stories and Allison. Because it was, like action scenes in movies, eventually they have to move plot or character forward. Otherwise, you just get to watch Liam Neeson jump over a fence in 25 different cuts, and it's just boring. I do. That is interesting. And I start thinking about conflict in these books. And the ones that I don't love, and I can see it as part of a character arc, so as long as this character arc is resolved, I'm like on board for it, is when a character or the people around that character see that person's identity as being somewhere on the A spectrum as a problem to be solved. Because again, I've definitely read some of those books, and you know, granted, a character can start in a place where they see it as a problem because they've been socialized that everybody feels this way. Everybody's horny teenagers during puberty, and when you're not, you're like, oh shit, this is a problem, there's something wrong with me. And a lot of books that have that as their identity or their sexual desire or lack thereof being a problem, ooh, I don't like those ones. Yeah, there are people who do it well, but for the most part, when it leads with that, like, again, as an ace person who had to do a fuck ton of like inner work, I'll say, to figure out that this is where I land, and who, I wouldn't say I saw myself as broken or it was a problem to be solved. It was just fucking confusing. Yeah. Because I only really started identifying as ace. How old am I? I'm 39 now.
You are 39. Yes. I got that
39.
one.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know. Maybe when I was 30, 31. Yeah.
Which honestly is pretty young for where this dialogue is and how public this dialogue is happening.
Because you brought up, like, we were talking before we started recording about like what this looks like in pop culture and how perhaps the lack of representation or the lack of stories that focus on these types of characters is because, you know, every teen movie I ever saw was like a teenage sex comedy. Yeah. Or even romance. It has the slow Vaseline on the lens, and it's like the music, like Take My Breath Away, Tom Cruise in Top Gun. Like, those are typically how we see relationships. I can't think of a mainstream piece of media that has aspec characters.
At least not as the primary characters.
Yeah, they might be secondary, like maybe one of the best friends. I'm thinking is one of the characters in Sex Education. I don't remember. Maybe, I don't know. But like,
or it's never spoken about whether or not they're ace, because it doesn't matter, because they're not supporting the main plot of the two main characters getting together.
There's
so
no
they could
side
be ace, but it's
they
not
don't get
relevant.
A love interest or lack thereof. It's fine. But like, no wonder we don't see a lot of it in here. And I think, like, when we look at mainstream media, like, sex is still such a big part of relationships. We don't see people necessarily on the A spectrum, or we don't even see arrow people. Like, let's be clear. Like, I feel like this is an letter of the alphabet, where I was joking that, like, y'all, this does not stand for ally. And the reason I said that was my threads last week, for some reason, where everybody like, guys, the A does not stand for ally. And it was like A-spec people kind of coming like, yeah, like, where's our representation? How do we get more visible? How do we get like more into the story? And it's like, no wonder, you know, people of my age and older didn't really even know what this was or see it as a quote unquote option. to identify, because it certainly wasn't anywhere we saw. And I think that's why I only really started thinking about it in the last couple of years, because prior to that, like as a teenager, in high school, in university, in my early 20s, it was like, really? Like, do people really walk around with like a persistent boner in their pants and I'm just not having that metaphorical boner? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, how many of us are like, of us folks on the aspec are just like, oh yeah, didn't find out until I was 30, versus I'm curious how people in middle school, junior high, and high school, do they know? What did they know about this term? Because I have to imagine it's a little bit more prevalent. Do your kids know? Because they're not younger end. But...
They're younger. Yeah. My 11-year-old, he and I will have a conversation in a year or two about it. But I know that he's a little less interested in relationships than a lot of his peers already. So he and I will have that conversation when it comes up naturally. I'm not going to sit him down and be like,
sit down and you have a whiteboard and here's how this all goes. No, it makes sense, because like even
I actually have books that I've bought for him, so that way, like if he doesn't feel comfortable coming to me, he can go read a book about it. Like there's several ways for him to learn this already. They're in my house and they're in his room, and he can like access them. But they didn't even do the sex education health class until this year in 5th grade. So
yeah, see, these are the things I wonder. What would be present now, and are we seeing more of it? My feeling is that we're seeing more of it now, kind of come out. But
or
again,
are you and I just tuned into it because this is something that's interesting to us?
That's what I'm always wondering.
It's certainly more accessible.
Yeah.
But does that mean that there's more awareness around it? I don't know.
I don't either.
When I was reading Unconventional Hearts by Emmy Sanders, they were college age kids, and the confidence with which they were able to express like, oh, this is my boyfriend, he's ace, and so we do it this way. Like, and to take care of each other in that way, or like going to like a Rainbow Alliance meeting and having it, because like we had a Rainbow Alliance at my high school and I never went because like I was like, I'm not though. I didn't know what I didn't know, and it was never really explained, and it felt like not like the outcast, but it didn't feel like it was a space where I necessarily wanted to spend my time because I didn't know enough about it to realize that maybe it could have been beneficial to me to learn about it. And so like there was a lack of awareness of even why I would need that, versus now reading some of these books where they're young adults and they're just fluent in this language that didn't exist for us. And I think about like, is this how my parents felt or previous generations felt in the 80s when some people were coming out as queer? And it's like, oh, but that wasn't a thing when I was in high school.
And then like because that's literally what I was just thinking. I think part of it too is that when we look at the rainbow family, folks on the A spectrum, like I'm going to simplify this down just for ease of discussion. We are probably the safest people under that umbrella, right? Like we're not outwardly other in terms of mainstream things, right? Like, not to say that you can't be gay and ace, you absolutely can. But when perhaps another identity is more of your primary visible identity to people outside of you, like there is like a safety and like a discussion thing, right? Like when you look at two gay people, two lesbians, non-binary people, and like the great fucking pronoun debate, or trans folks and how much danger they're in. Like, I feel like that's another reason why they get a bigger piece of the pie, because it just feels because
they're more visible.
It's something visible. That primary identity can be more visible, and so it's easier, it's more accessible. I don't know, to write stories about it. Whereas you could see an ace person with a partner and assume lots of things based on what their partner is, but I doubt you would look at that and go, I wonder if they like to have sex or if they don't.
Right. And also I think the mean is everybody does. Why wouldn't you like it?
Yeah.
Or why wouldn't you like it with anybody? Or, I remember being in college, and obviously in college there's going to be like this huge hookup culture. And it was like, you just like do that with somebody you don't know? Like it was so
weird to me.
Foreign to me.
I never understood that. Like even from a safety perspective. And that's what I wondered for a long time. I'm like, am I reticent to participate in this part of culture? Because for me, it's a safety thing.
Yeah.
Like, who knows? Like it was so.
I attribute it to being religious growing up.
Yeah.
Not necessarally to my own sexuality and my own, but there was a lot of like religious guilt and trauma and things around that where it was like, oh, but what would God think? And it's like, I don't know. Now I have very different feelings about that. But, and so there was a part of me that wondered if my hesitation was socialized into me, or is it just how my brain works that I have to connect with somebody and I have to like, I think I shared this last year on the episode, like Ben and I had a 9-hour first date.
Yeah.
Because I needed to trust him before I did anything else.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to feel connected to somebody before I would do anything. So like for me, the casual sex just was never something I could wrap my brain around for myself.
Me neither. And it makes, because then you can start layering into it all of these other things, especially with folks who would identify an aspec. And you see some of this in the stories is like, is there something just wrong with their hormones? Like low testosterone, estrogen's weird or whatever, and you quote unquote fix that or regulate those, and all of a sudden you have a different sex drive. Like medications that you're on, is that suppressing libido, and is that why? So there is no like answer to this, but I think more so how does this get depicted in stories is what's really interesting. But it makes me wonder, how do other ace folks approach romance as a reader? Not necessarily as an author coming up with stories, but like as a reader, obviously this is a very small sample size that we're dealing with between you and me right here on this thing. But like, it does make me wonder, other folks who identify somewhere on the ace or arrow or, non-allo, I guess, side of the spectrum, like, what are your thoughts on romance in general, romance that has explicit sex in it, romance that has other aspec people in it? I'm curious if y'all are listening and you are identifying in this space. Like, I would love to know. Comment on Substack, comment on our social media, on our threads, or comment on the episode on Spotify, because I'm just legitimately curious. Because we had in the first year of the show, we had Diana McCullum come on to talk about her book, Sex Lives of Superheroes. And she kind of dropped in there that she identifies as asexual. And that wasn't the point of the discussion. But when we were talking about her book, which is all like literally how do superheroes like Wolverine, the Flash, Batman, like what is their sexual relationships like? And what are the implications if they were dipped in ooze when they were younger and they're radioactive spiders or something? Like, how does that affect their partner? Or the question I remember from that episode, and honestly it's a hilarious book of
the duck spiral dick. That was the thing that stuck with me after
the one that I remember is, well, Wolverine is immortal and self-healing. Do his sperm ever die?
Yeah.
Once they leave his body, do they die? So if you want to go read Sex Lives of Superheroes or go back and listen to that episode, it was one of the early ones. But like, how do they approach that? How do other ace folks look at romance and be like, what draws them to it? What repulses them or repels them or causes them to make other choices? Like, I can certainly speak from my experience, but I'm curious how other folks who are maybe leaning more towards the sex averse side of things, because I'm not sex averse, but folks who are on that end, I would love to know how you approach this genre as a reader.
I think honestly for me, it was like understanding of myself by seeing how other people think. And I think that one of the things that I love the most about about romance is how much interiority there is, how much you get to like be inside someone's head. I think that as genres go, it has the most psychological safety, but also it has the most like kind of inward thinking and awareness. And romance characters are probably way more likely to go for therapy than horror or thriller or litfic or anything.
Although really the horror and the supernatural people should really go to therapy.
They really should go to therapy.
Can you imagine Insidious or something? It's like it opens in a therapist's office. Although that would be kind of amusing.
I will say I just went and saw the Neil Diamond like jukebox musical, and
with
it is
Hugh Jackman and Kate Hudson.
No, it was on the stage.
Like the stage show. Okay.
Yeah, the stage show. And it was entirely set around his relationship with his therapist, talking through all of the issues that he had.
Actually, I love that as a framing device.
And so you get like his life story where it starts with him like being unsuccessful and finally selling, oh God, what was his first song? I'm a Believer was his first song. And we sold it to the Monkees, and then he goes home to his wife who's pregnant, and then he goes out to celebrate and he meets someone else, and that's Cherry Cherry, and like you get the whole thing. But he's repeating it back to his therapist and processing it with his therapist in the chairs off stage slightly, like sort of on the side stage while they're doing the big numbers in the main stage. And it's like, it's becoming, I don't know why I was telling you this, it's becoming more acceptable even in the generalized storytelling to say, hey, therapy's important. And like, we are millennials, so I think that we are more attuned into therapy's helpful, therapy's important. But like the people who were in that theater with me were boomers. And I know that boomers are less likely to do that. So I'm like, thanks, Neil. Thanks, Neil, for normalizing therapy while I listen to Sweet Caroline
done.
and have all the lights and
Neil
all the
Diamond.
confetti and all the people coming out from behind the creepy motel in Memphis where you wrote Sweet Caroline. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Neil Diamond.
Oh, we love that. Meg, what are you shipping the most about asexual, aspec romance?
You know, I think that it is one facet of the characters, but it doesn't have to be their entire identity. So whether the character presents as hetero, whether they're in a straight relationship, whether they're queer, like that's not necessarily the structure that matters for this, even though it does fall under that LGBTQIA umbrella. But I like that it's just like it's internal within the relationship and it's so conversational and that it's so clear about you have to be a good communicator and have good boundaries. So I love that this is becoming more prevalent and that it's becoming more accepted in the ways that we're talking about this, both in the romance genre and hopefully out in society, but that it's being modeled in romance so that people are able to recognize themselves in it. And it doesn't have to be, oh, this is the way that gay people talk, you know, or something along those lines where it's only relevant to people who are queer. It can be anybody who just has this not quite feeling the same sexual attraction that seems to be the norm that quote unquote most people have, but how do we even know? Like there's no really good way to get this information. So I like that sort of like interiority of it, that it just is kind of how you feel, and that's valid and that's important.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. That's very nice.
What about you, Nikki? What do you ship the most about ace romances?
I think for me is it's like it helped me not only one figure out kind of who I am in a way, not as like a full declarative statement, but it helped me fill in some edges. It helped me fill in some puzzle pieces, but also to show that folks who are aspec and who want to have romantic relationships can have fulfilling romantic relationships. Because I'm not going to lie, dating in my area as an ace person is fucking impossible.
I bet.
It is really hard. Dating has always been really hard for me, and
dating is hard, and then when you add like small town kind of rural, like
and then
it's
you
not
just
easy.
honestly, like, I started being way more upfront on the apps when I go in and out over the last like decade or so. Is I started putting like demi ace in my profile like right up front, and the reality is of course nobody fucking reads your profile. Y'all, I spend so much time on my profiles because everything that's in your profile should be a conversation starter. I give y'all so many fucking conversation starters, and your reply is hi or your dog is cute. Where's the rest of the conversation, my dude? But
I mean, your dog is very cute.
My
to be
dog's
fair.
fucking adorable. But they don't read that part. So as we continue talking, and then maybe it pops up later, maybe after we go for a coffee, and I'm like, hey, this, and they're like, oh, no, I'm out. And it fucking sucks because it does make you feel like that kind of like broken, I'm the problem type of deal. So I love romance where it's like, no, it is possible. Yeah. It is possible, and it is fulfilling, and it is awesome. I think that's probably my favorite part about it. To be like, one day, me. When will it be me? But I do love that about it. And they can still be like nice and good and hot, great storylines, and still have ace characters in it. So loving it.
Love that.
Fantastic. Before we get into the question of what we are shipping this week, a gentle reminder, please head on over to your podcast provider of choice. Leave us a rating. We'd love it if it's 5 stars, but I will accept 4. You don't have to give us 5 out of 5. 4 is also entirely reasonable. If it's below a 4, maybe not. Thank you, but no. Head on over, give us a rating, review, and subscribe. If you listen in a browser in the Substack app, it would be really awesome if you could just head on over to Spotify or Apple and just do that, and then you never have to open it again. It does help us rise in the charts. It helps more people find out about us, and we'd greatly, greatly appreciate it. Do it for Pride Month. This is my Pride Month request. Support the rainbow umbrella. Go
just give us 5 stars, and then your comment can be just a rainbow flag.
And I will call you an ally. You can earn the ally title if you do this. Because you can't self-identify as an ally. It's a title that must be bestowed upon you. I'm not above bribery, y'all.
And not in the way that the coach from Bottoms was like, the best way to be an ally is to not show up for the meeting.
Yeah. God, that was such a fucking funny movie.
Such a great movie.
Oh my God. Meg, what are you shipping this week?
Well, I'm going to choose one of my ace books that I didn't get a chance to talk about. I'm going to talk about Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. I've talked about Alison Cochrane before. She's better known for The Charm Offensive. That was her debut novel. This is not within the same series, but this is a new standalone novel. It is two characters who were best friends in middle school, and then they had some sort of falling out, and now 10 years later they both work at the same high school in the English department. One of them is like kind of type Rosemary is like type A overachiever. Logan is sort of like a slacker who hasn't grown up. And the story starts on the last day of school. The whole English department goes out to Applebee's for like Bahama Mamas, and Logan gets broken up with by the science teacher, and she was like, "Oh, how could you break up with me? I didn't know we were in a relationship." And the science teacher's like, "What's my name?" You know? And then at the same time, two tables over, while Logan is getting like, who would do that in a public place in front of all of your colleagues, right? Like, it's kind of shitty. Rosemary is getting laid off because they don't have the funding for AP English the next year. And then they get into the parking lot, and both of them get a phone call from their high school English teacher from when they were in high school, and he has become sort of like a surrogate father to both of them, and he has cancer. And they know that he's been in cancer treatment for a while, and he fell, and he broke his foot, and so they both go rushing over to the rehab facility, and he says to both of them, "I'm dying, and I want you both to take me on a death trip. We're in Washington. I want to die in Maine. Let's go." Ooh. And so they do this cross-country road trip. And the really type A character shows up with the laminated, here's the itinerary, here's where we're staying, and then things start to go wrong. And Logan, who is the one who's like kind of flying by the seat of her pants, is able to pick up the pieces that Rosemary can't take care of because she's so she has so much anxiety. And Logan knows that from when they were friends before this big falling out. And then over the course of this road trip that's supposed to be 5 days and ends up stretching to 3 weeks, they have the conversations about what happened then. And we hear that Rosemary hasn't been with anyone else because she's just hasn't been interested in being with anyone else. And so Logan gets to guide her into that and sort of be her first everything. But Rosemary didn't feel like she was missing out on anything. So it wasn't like a huge, like, asexual awakening. It was just like, well, this is just who I am. I didn't trust anyone the way that I trusted you.
Oh, I love that. Beautiful.
So it's this beautiful like road trip coming together, found family, all of them queer. You know, the teacher reconnects with an old flame. Like they have a dog in the car with them for this like 3,000-mile road trip across the country, and they're stopping all these different places and eating so much shitty food, and it's just like it's really delightful. The way that it all comes together is very satisfying. I don't want to give out too many spoilers, but highly recommend Here We Go Again by Alison Cochran.
Okay, I love it. Adding to my list.
All right, and Nikki, what are you shipping this week?
I'm shipping the latest release from Jay Hogan. It's called The Greening of Thaddeus Gray. So we meet Thaddeus, or Thad. He's just kind of had a really shitty day because he got a text that basically said, "Hey, ditch Tad and let's go have sex." And he goes, "Wait, I'm Tad." And turns out that his boyfriend and his best friend, who is also his business partner, have been fucking around for 5 months, and he finds out. God. In a fit of like, what the fuck, he gets in his car and just starts driving. And he ends up getting a little bit lost, and then he crashes his car in the middle of the night into a compost heap. And he literally gets out of the car and he's covered in animal shit of all kinds. And then he falls asleep in a greenhouse, and then he is found by Ryder, who owns the property. He's like landscaping type of business. And they slowly get to know each other over time, and that ends up staying with him for a few weeks as he tries to like fix his life and deal with what am I going to do when my best friend and business partner refuses to let me sell or buy me out because I'm the one in the software company that does all the coding. I'm like the talent and he's the charming face. How do I navigate that? At the same time, Ryder is trying to navigate that a big corporation is trying to put in a data center next to his property, and how is that going to affect his land, his lease, his ability to have a living, as well as the small community that they live in on, I believe it's in North Island in New Zealand. And then of course secrets come out, things happen, dramatic reconciliations. But it's funny because the reason it's called The Greening of Thaddeus Gray is that kills everything living. He pulls out flowers because he thinks they're weeds, and then over time, as he learns to get more comfortable with the outdoors and with flowers, he begins to change his life, and Ryder starts to change his life along with it. Like most Jay Hogan books, it's intensely romantic. It's funny. and the characters have to get through some really hard truths and hard conversations before they get their happy ever after. So if you love Jay Hogan, if you love books set in New Zealand, or if you just love a dramatic bitch of an opening, check out The Greening of Thaddeus Gray by Jay Hogan. And that is all for us this week. If you'd like to support the show, there's a few things you can do for absolutely zero monies. As we said, rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. Give us a follow on social media. We are at First Dates and Soulmates on pretty much the main platforms. If you would like to get a customized playlist of some of our best episodes, head on over to our very fancy website, firstdatesandsoulmates.com. Meg has a quiz just for you. And if you'd like to send us a little bit of money, a couple ways you can do that too. Number 1, check out our merch store. It's linked on TeePublic in the comments. Number 2, subscribe to the show on Substack. Do it for 1 month. Do it for many months. We're happy that you're here. Or 3, we have recently started offering sponsorships for the show. Meg has put together some really epic packages on that same website. All of this linked for you in the show notes. Thank you, Soulmates. We love so much that you're here. That is wrapping up our Pride Month, but just like everywhere else, the queer love is continuing on this show forever and ever and ever. Coming up next week, I guess we're celebrating Canada Day. We're talking about heated rivalry again, but this time looking into what made it great and coming up with some really awesome suggestions on what you should read next. The cultural firestorm of heated rivalry continues. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.